Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, 2022 MITRE Engenuity ATT&CK Evaluations, Decoding the Results. My name is Martin Zugec. I'm a Technical Solutions Director at Bitdefender, and I will be your host today. I would like to welcome our special speaker, Dragos Gavrilut. Dragos is one of the leaders of the Bitdefender labs. He's also a professor at university. And most importantly for our discussion today, he's been active participant in MITRE evaluation for the last couple of years. So he has a lot of experience with the topic today. Before we start the webinar, a few housekeeping rules. Please note that you are muted as we are recording this webinar, and we will provide access to recording within the next few days after this session. So what we are going to talk today is the MITRE evaluation on March 31st. The results of the latest round of MITRE evaluations for security solutions were released. This year, 30 different security vendors participated from the leading security companies, including Bitdefender, and were tested on ability to detect the tactics and techniques of the Wizard Spider and Sandworm team. The format that we are going to use today, I have a bunch of questions that I'm interested in, and I'm going to ask Dragos for his insights and comment. So let's jump right into this. This is going to be an educational webinar that is applicable to any vendor, not only Bitdefender. So first, Dragos, the question that I have is, I went to a cybersecurity event a couple of weeks ago that was designed for like mid-sized companies and security leaders. And when I was talking to them about ATT&CK evaluations, everyone was familiar with ATT&CK framework, but not really familiar with evaluations themselves. So can you tell us what's the difference between ATT&CK framework and ATT&CK evaluations?
Hello, everyone, and hello, Martin. Okay, let's talk about MITRE ATT&CK. So first of all, I'm going to describe a little bit the ATT&CK framework and try to explain what it is. And to simply put it, it's a knowledge database with a lot of information related to various techniques that are actually being used in different cyber attacks. And if you look at the screen, you can see also a link where you can actually go there and check out all of these documented techniques. Now, there are a lot of them, so they kind of need to be classified in certain ways. And the way, let's say, MITRE organize them is on 4 levels. The first level is based on the component DOS against where the attack is being performed. So, for example, if you are performing an attack on Windows, you have certain type of attacks. If you're doing Linux, you have some that are a little bit different. Now, the second one is called the attack step, the tactic, and it pretty much reflects how that attack is being performed. And the third one is the technique. We're going to go more into details in a while. And for each techniques, there are some sub-techniques. I'm going to explain them shortly. So let's look at the first one. And there are actually a lot of, let's say, operating systems that are actually associated with various attacks, from Windows, Linux, Mac, Android, iOS, different type of clouds, containers, ICS, or network. So all of these are pretty much the first, the first level on how this database is organized. Now, if we choose, for example, Windows, then we're going to see that we have like a lot of tactics, and these tactics are pretty much like an attack step. So you have initial access, execution per system, privilege escalation, defensive evasion, lateral movement, collection, exfiltration, impact, and so on. Now, if you look at the screen, you're going to see a small number in yellow for next to each tactic. This is the number of techniques that are known to be associated for that tactic for the Windows operating system. So let's say that we look at the, if we look at this and we just compute the data, we're going to get 12 attack steps and 182 techniques. So yeah, it's pretty a lot of them, and this is just for one operating system. That's why I'm actually saying that the ATT&CK framework is a very comprehensive and large database. Now, let's say that we select the lateral movement. Now, lateral movement has 9 techniques. Pretty much it different ways a lateral movement can be done. And if you look here, you're going to see it's via exploitation of remote services, internal spear phishing, lateral truth transfer, remote services, and so on. Now, you're going to see next to each one a number, something that starts with T and a number. Now, that T comes from technique, and this is, a unique identifier in the, MITRE ATT&CK framework database that refers to that specific technique. Now, as I previously said, for each technique, we got a lot of sub-techniques. And if we take remote services, we got actually 5 sub-techniques like remote desktop, Windows admin shares, so, via Samba, distributed component object model, VNC, and Windows remote management. So pretty much, even if you're doing as a technique, if you're using a remote services, you can actually do it by using one of these sub-techniques. So think about the attack framework of something that is being organized in this way. Now, if we are to actually look at one of these, let's say, sub-techniques, for example, the remote desktop protocol, then we're going to see a web page, and you can see the link here that is provided by the guys from the MITRE, where you get a textual explanation on how the attack is being performed. Some examples of the attack were actors that are known to have performed this type of sub-technique when they attack somebody. Possible mitigation actions, a very important possible detection strategies, and limitation. The limitation is quite clear because there are some cases where even if something is known to be an attack technique, it can be something that you cannot accurately detect, and it's actually in some cases you get this kind of information directly from the database. So all of this database is actually organized in a matrix where the columns are actually the tactics, and you can see initial access, execution, persisting, and so on, and the rows or each cell is actually a sub-technique. So and it looks like this if you're going to the MITRE website. But the most important thing is that this is something that actually everybody calls the attack matrix. And, it's kind of like a dedicated name right now. And, if you look at one of these, like lateral movement, and I have just selected lateral movement because it's the one that we just talked about, you're going to see that each of the cells from the lateral movement are actually some of the components, some of the techniques that we've previously stepped over. Okay, so that's the attack framework, a large database of techniques that are being used in cybersecurity attacks. Now, what is the attack evaluation? So we can consider the attack framework as a blueprint, a template that can be used by a red team to create a test and an attack. Now, what is this about? So let's say that we have a red team. Now, the first step will be select a documented attack. Like APT29, Carbonite, Wizard Spider, Fin7, and so on. Just select one. Now, take that attack that was already documented by someone else and map it to the MITRE metrics, techniques and sub-techniques. And I'm sure that if the attack is properly documented, you're going to, map it easily under certain techniques and sub-techniques. Now, once you do this, you have like a list of tactics or steps and techniques and sub-techniques that are known to be part of the attack. Then create a similar attack that respects the techniques from step number 2, meaning that if you know that let's say a lateral movement is being done using a specific technique, you're going to do it in a similar manner but with different tools, but you're going to do the same thing. And finally, after you create all of these steps, you just replay the same attack, but this time against various security vendors, and you record their results. And this entire process, and mainly the replay, is actually what an attack evaluation means. So select an actor, build a similar attack that respect the techniques that are being used by that attack and that actor, and then replay your simulated attack against other security vendors and check out how they behave.
Okay, so pretty much you can say the attack framework is like the shared vocabulary. So all the security vendors know exactly like what is being done. And then we choose like two scenarios that where we emulate like known threat actors. And effectively what's happening is from these metrics, we choose some of the techniques and then we report what was the behavior of security solutions against these specific techniques and sub-techniques. Perfect.
Exactly.
Now, the next question that I have for you is, there is like a lot of different comparative tests on the market, and very often they are like completely different results. So what makes attack evaluations different and unique compared to all these other independent tests that are on the market today?
Okay, so that's actually a very good question. And you know, the first time the attack evaluation appeared, they actually said, the guys from the MITRE said something that we're not going to provide any type of interpretation of the results. We're just going to, you know, put the raw data there and everybody could analyze them as they want. So this is a little bit different because generally whenever somebody is performing a security test, it has a couple of steps. The first one is data collection, meaning that, you know, you're going to run some malware, some attacks, and pretty much you're going to focus on recording logs, screenshots, anything that you can from the security product that pretty much showed how that security product behave against a specific attack. The next part will be to evaluate the data that you have collected from the first part. Pretty much take all of this information that you collected and usually create a final score somehow. You know, rank some information higher, other lower, but somehow end up providing a number, something that says this product is better than the other one. And this is actually the final result, because you provide a ranking criteria where you said, hey, I have tested these 20 products, this is the best, this is the second, and so on. So, and this is, you know, kind of a regular process for any type of security test, or for most of them. Now, as I previously said, most of the security tests are here. Now, MITRE attacks actually stop somewhere here. And you're going to notice that it didn't stop directly on under the data collection. And there is one reason I did this, is because in reality, they actually compute some scores. Not all of them, but they do compute some scores. So it's not, they don't go all the way. They don't provide like a, you know, overall score that can say this product is better than the other one, but they do you know, compute some scores that can further be used to create an overall score. So they're somewhere in between. Now, let's take this phrase that I previously said, that there is no interpretation of results, because this is actually what they are, you know, stating about themselves. And let's discuss a little bit what this actually means. So first of all, there are no biases, meaning that they just collect the data, they just make sure that the data is the correct one, but they don't interpret it. So you cannot have like a problem because somebody says, hey, I collect the data, but I don't understand the way you're, you know, explaining the detection or how you're correlating some things. So if they, you know, if they don't correlate something, there is no bias into this. And that's, from one point of view, it's a really good thing. The other one, and that's actually the bad thing about this, is that everybody gets a chance to be number one, or everybody gets to be number one, not necessarily a chance, because if nobody is creating some sort of rule, then everybody can create its own rule. And we're actually going to talk a little bit later about this, because it's really important to understand how, you know, this, let's say, option can actually morph into something that's not really okay. And there is also one more difference that I do believe is quite important, and it's MITRE attack does not include a false positive test. And this is also something that I feel is important, because as a general observation, any validation of a classification algorithm has to include two data sets, a positive one and a negative one. And if you don't have one of them, so for example, if you don't have a false positive test, then pretty much you're going to say that this product is better than the other one, but that product can suffer from a lot of alert fatigue. Because it's really easy to create a product that detects everything, including the clean ones. You're going to be the best, but pretty much nobody's going to be able to use you. Now, the second one, if you don't have like a, let's say, malicious sample set, then it kind of defeats the purpose of a security solution. Now, that being said, there is a measure that is pretty much used in all of machine learning models or in classification problem that is called accuracy. Now, the accuracy is, the sum of the correctly classified malicious test cases plus the correctly classified benign cases divided by the total number of test cases. Now, just to simplify, the first part is called the true positive. The second one is called the true negative. And this is how you're actually going to find it in academic literature. Now, let's take two hypothetical scenarios here, because I do believe it's quite important. And, let's say that we have security vendor 1, security vendor 2. Both of them have 50 benign cases to test and 50 malicious cases to test. Now, in the first case, let's say that the detection rate is 90%, but also a 20% false positive rate. In the second case, we have an 80% detection rate and 2% false positive rate. Now, merely on this observation, on the first glance, one might say that the security vendor 1 is the better product. Obviously, 90% is bigger than 80%, so you would say that, hey, it's best. But if we're trying to compute the true positive and false negative, and we can do this, it's 45 and 40, and then compute the accuracy, we're going to see that the accuracy of the first product is 85%. And if we do the same with the second one, we're going to see that the accuracy is 89%. Now, the purpose of this exercise is that depending on how you look at things, one vendor might be better than the other one. In this case, the security vendor number 2 is, if we're looking at the accuracy, is the better product. And there is actually a conclusion here, and it's that there is no such thing as a perfect test. And everyone should look for the data, for the text that better express his or her security needs. I do hope that this actually clarifies a little bit why attack framework is different from the other ones.
Okay, so Dragos, just to be able for everyone to interpret and understand the MITRE evaluation, can you explain to us like the basic terminology for MITRE? What are the steps, sub-steps, and what are the different detection categories that are being used?
Yeah, sure, Martin. So let's discuss a little bit on this, and I'm actually going to start with the previous slide. And if you remember this slide, it was the slide where we actually explain what an attack evaluation is and how it's getting built based on the attack framework. And there is one word here that I said, but I didn't quite explain, and it was record the results. So let's try to understand what record the results actually means in terms of attack evaluation. And it's not really complicated. For each attack, there are series of steps, tactics that put together one after another are actually the one that actually form the attack. Like you have the initial compromise, you have some persistence. All of these are parts, larger parts of one attack. Now, for each step, you actually have to divide it into several substeps, and each one of those substeps actually corresponds to a different technique that is being used. And obviously, for each subtechnique, substep, you actually organize and store any type of information that you can get from the security product, but information that is related to that technique. And after you do this, you're not just going to record it, you're also going to grade it. And let's see what does grading means in this particular scenario. So if we look at this picture, and this is actually the one that the MITRE guys are using, they kind of say that you can get one of these grades. You can get none, telemetry, general, tactic, and technique. And the keyword here is context. So the less you get, close to none, you're going to provide actually less context, and the more you're getting closer to technique, it's more context. Now, obviously, it's really easy to say, hey, the key component here is context. But what does context actually means in this scenario? So let's try to see how we can actually better understand the grading system. So we're going to take like a very simple scenario. Let's say that we have endpoint A that an attacker controls that performs a lateral movement against the endpoint B. And let's look at this non-telemetry general tactic and techniques gradings and see what the product has done, what the product has to say to get one of these. So obviously the first one is simple, none. It has to do nothing. If it if it doesn't even detect that there is a connection between endpoint A and endpoint B, then you're going to get the grading none. Pretty much you didn't understand anything from that specific technique. Now telemetry means that you do have some information, but it's not everything that you need to actually make a clear decision that something is malicious or not. Pretty much you can say, hey, I know the source and the destination IP or the name of the machines. I know the port. Maybe I know the protocol. I know the bytes that are being sent. But that's it. It's kind of limited within this area. So it's not something that you can say for certain that, hey, this is a lateral movement, but it's definitely something that a SOC analyst can use to correlate with other actions. Now, general is a little bit better. Your security product is going to provide a clear statement saying that, the connection between endpoint A and endpoint B is malicious. Now, just saying that it's malicious, it means that there is some algorithm somewhere that actually decided this. You're not going to get too much information. You don't know why it was considered to be malicious, but obviously it's better than telemetry. There is at least some component there in the product that actually decided that this is something that should be carefully looked upon. Now, moving on to tactic, then at this point you're actually going to get the lateral movement information. So you're going to receive a message like the connection between endpoint A and endpoint B is the lateral movement from A to B. Now, it doesn't answer how that lateral movement was performed, but it's still far better than the other ones. Now you know exactly what happened there. Not exactly, but you kind of know what happened between those two endpoints. And finally, we reach technique, where usually you kind of need to say, hey, the connection between endpoint A and endpoint B is a lateral movement that is being done via Windows Remote Management. You can actually also introduce the technique number, and you can add other information like using credentials that were stolen from somewhere else. Now, this is the context I was actually telling you about. Context means understanding what happened and how it happened, and the more context you provide, the more you're going to get going closer to getting the technique grade, and the less you have, you're going to receive none or telemetry and so on. So this actually means that whenever we're going to perform an attack, we're going to have several sub steps, and each sub-step, because pretty much it's a technique, can get one of these grading: techniques, tactic, general, telemetry, or none. Obviously, and actually starting from this year, a sub-step will receive only one of them, the higher ones. Up to this year, there are some options where you can see multiple, ranking that were received. So pretty much you can say that all of these sums, the number of techniques that the number of substacks that have the technique ranking, the number of substacks that have tactic, and so on. If all of these are sum, they should produce as a result the total number of substeps that were actually being used in this attack. And what you're seeing here, this pie is just a mere representation of a theoretical attack where 20% of the results are obtained via technique. In 10% of the cases, the security product didn't understand anything. In 50% of the cases, it managed to record telemetry and so on. So let's discuss a little bit about the latest attack evaluation, and it consists in 2 scenarios with a spider and a sandworm, 19 steps, out of which 15 are for Windows, 4 are for Linux, and 109 substacks. And this is actually what we're mostly interested in, the substacks, where 90 are for Windows and 19 are for Linux. Now, what's very, let's say, interesting about how MITRE prepared the data is that if you remember the MITRE metrics, you can use one of their tools, the MITRE Navigator, and you can get an image like this, where you can actually map what techniques are being used. And you do have this, nice color-coded form. For example, the magenta one are specific to Wizard Spider, and so on. So you can actually see everything that they used, not how they use it, not the implementation, but what were the techniques that were being used. That being said, Martin, hopefully it makes more sense right now. I'm going to get back to you.
Okay, so pretty much the MITRE evaluations this year, there are 109 sub-steps. And for each of those, every single vendor can get one of the 5 grades to think about it, starting from not detecting anything, going to ability to actually collect the right data, even if the vendor cannot interpret what it means if it is malicious, and going to the highest level, which is the technique, where we can say what happened, how it happened, provide the details, and so on and so forth. So that just thinking about it, and I've seen the data, so I know that this is a lot to process. It's a lot of numbers, and again, without providing the rankings and interpretation, it can be hard to understand what is important and what is not. So the next question is, what is your recommendation? How should security practitioners interpret the results? Like, what are the most important metrics? What are like the key takeaways that you should be focusing on?
Thank you, Martin. So if you remember how we positioned the MITRE test, they were positioned like this, somewhere in between data collection and evaluation. And if you remember, we said that we didn't position just at the data collection because they actually compute some metrics. So let's see what are those metrics that they compute. And the first one is called analytic coverage. Now, this metric actually, counts the number of substeps that have one of these rankings, general, tactic, or technique. So, if you have, 20 substeps that were ranked with general, 10 with techniques, and another 10 with tactics, then the score for the analytic coverage will be 20 plus 10 plus 10, meaning 40. So quite simple to compute. The second one is visibility. That's pretty much very similar to analytic coverage. The only thing is that it adds subsets that have telemetry to the sum. So it's pretty much telemetry plus the analytic coverage. And they do have a third one. It's called telemetry coverage. That is the number of steps that have just telemetry ranking. And I think it's also important to understand why. So let's take the first one and discuss a little bit about him. So analytic coverage is pretty much very useful for mid-sized organizations that actually have their own SOC team. And it's likely that the alert fatigue is going to be reduced in this case. Keep in mind that this score doesn't include, telemetry. So it's just cases where you're kind of certain on what's happening there. So from one point of view, this is really good in this case. This shouldn't be confused with the product ability to block a threat. It kind of reflects on, the ability to understand what's happening there. So if you're an organization that, needs something to, a security solution that can be used to protect you, then don't look at this metric. It's not going to help you find something good for you in this case. And can be very useful even for organizations that don't use an MDR service, but as a way to understand the detection quality of a security product. Okay, now moving on to the second one, to the visibility part. That's usually very good for large organizations that are in particular interested in having visibility into an attack. Now, why am I saying this? Because alert fatigue is likely to happen here. Now, think about it. If you're a large organization, then you have resources. You can actually spare some resources to look into telemetry and create some other correlation there. You don't need data that is already tagged. Now, obviously, this will imply some extra effort, some extra cost, but if you can afford it, then you should actually look at the visibility. And finally, let's discuss a little bit about telemetry coverage. And this is, again, very useful for a very large organization that have dedicated resources. So you can actually buy a product that only provides telemetry if you have a very powerful MDR services that can correlate this and that can look into, very large amounts of data. Now, there is one thing here that is quite interesting. The bigger this score is right now, the more likely it is that an alert fatigue phenomenon is going to be encountered. And think about it. Let's say that you have 109 steps. Now, assuming that you had telemetry for 50 of them or half of them, then this actually means that somebody has to look into that telemetry and decide what actually happened there. And it's very likely that besides the effort, you're going to have telemetry for something else. So alert fatigue is quite possible. On the other hand, if you have very few of these, but more into the type of technique, then it's likely that you have a very reduced chance of alert fatigue and rather a better detection categories or a better classification. Now, besides this technique, I need to discuss a little about another one, and that's not one that the MITRE presented, and it's the technique count. And if we have to look at how let's say MITRE is computing this, we can actually count the number of substacks that have just the technique ranking. Now, why is this important? Because this will actually explain to you what is the quality of the technical engines between a security product. You can think about this as a way to see how many attack insights a product can produce. Think about it. Analytic coverage can be higher, but it can be higher because of general. You can have like 0 on tactics on techniques, a very high number on general. So the analytic coverage can be higher, but it will not provide any insights. So I would say that it's quite important to actually look into this number. Now, again, since we're talking about techniques, please keep in mind that this is not something you can actually find directly on the website. So, this actually raised the question, where can I get the data if I want to make my own computation? And this is quite simple. So the first one will be, go to the attack evaluation site here on the screen, click on him, and you should see a page that looks like this. Now, the first thing that you do is you need to select the, from the combo box there, the attack scenario that you're interested in. In this case, it's Wizard Sparta and Sandworm. Now, the second step is select one participant. Obviously, in this case, I'm going to choose Bitdefender and click on it. Now, the moment you're going to do this, you're going to enter, a page that looks like this, where the first thing that you need to do is select an adversary and then click on download JSON. Now, download JSON is going to provide the raw data as it is in a JSON format. I'm not going to stay here and discuss the format. It's outside the purpose of this webinar, but you can actually get the raw data like this. Now, if you want to get the pre-computed data, all you have to do is just scroll down a little bit, and you're going to see, if you reach the evaluation summary, you're going to see a table where you have analytic coverage, telemetry coverage, visibility, and there is a detection count that MITRE actually stopped using this year, so you're not going to see it for the last test. But you do have these pre-computed values out there, so you can actually use. Well, Martin, I hope I cleared some of the things up with this explanation.
Yeah, definitely. Can I ask you, can you go one slide back, please?
Definitely.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the way how I understand this is pretty much you have 109 steps. And this is really much about like the quality of the analytics that the vendor can provide. So if you want the security vendor to do majority of work and interpretation and understanding what the data means, you are looking for analytic coverage. If you want to process the data on your own, you just want like the raw data and you know how to find what it means, then telemetry coverage is like, or the visibility is more important for you. So for example, in this example from the Bitdefender, the fact that for the current evaluation, we have only 3 out of 109 sub-steps under telemetry, that's actually a good thing because that means
Yes.
we've been able to provide like advanced analytics for 106
the rest of them. Yes, exactly.
Okay, perfect. So let's go to the next question. Okay, so we are still talking about the attack evaluations. We are talking about some of the limitations and expectations that we should have. Now, you should not choose security vendor only based on the attack evaluations result, because there is a lot more to consider when you are choosing the security solution. So the question is, are attack evaluations comprehensive? And aside from just looking at these results, what else would you recommend to look at when the customers are choosing the security vendor?
Okay. So I think the first thing that we kind of need to say is that there is no such thing as a test that can fill all security demands. So, and if we are actually talking about security requirements, let's talk about it. And assuming that you have your own company and you need to choose a security product, what are the kind of things you're going to think about it? And I'm just going to talk to a couple of them. There are obviously more. One will be the analytics capabilities of that product. The other one will be the visibility that that product can provide. The third one will be how the product behaves in terms of alert fatigue and false positives. The fourth one will be, does the product has a good protection, provide the good protection or prevention capabilities? Obviously, security posture compliance, it's also something that might be of interest. And let's not forget the price. If I'm like a smaller company, I wouldn't like to pay too much for a product. So price, or the total cost of ownership, that's also very important. Now, and again, I didn't, let's say, highlighted all of the possible things somebody that wants to select a product might think about, but those are one of the most important ones. Now, besides this, it's also important to know if your product can work on Windows, on Linux, on Mac, on containers, on Android, and so on. So the operating system is also very important. So if we are to think about MITRE and the last test from the MITRE, well, it kind of provides information about analytics capabilities. That's obviously about visibility. And yeah, let's not forget that it has like a protection test, but it's also only for Windows and Linux. So can we say that it satisfies all of our demands? Obviously not. And just to give you a quick example, if you are a company that only uses Mac and you're interested in, a test that provides you detection and false positive rate for Mac, then MITRE is not the test you need to go to. You need to search something else because it's not going to provide you this kind of information. And the reality is that there are multiple tests that are done within the space of a year, and from multiple testers. And each one of them can actually provide a different phase of the security capabilities of a product. And it's good to take a look at all of them before actually deciding. And why am I saying this? Because there is a very important thing here, and this is consistency. And why am I saying this? Well, let's look at an example. Let's say that we have the security vendor one that participated on a specific test for the last 11 years. And this is the detection rate that that security product had within that test over the last 11 years. In some years, it has somewhere around 50, 60%. In other years, somewhere around 80, 90%. And it varies. Now, let's look at the security product 2. It's pretty much similar, somewhere around 80 or 90%, but it's more constant, more within the same margin. Now, the bigger question here is, if you have to choose one of the product, which one will you choose? Because, obviously, if you have a product that is not consistent in test for a large period of time, can you be certain that the year you're going to get it is going to be the year where he's going to perform at its best, or maybe at its worst? Well, at the same time, if you have a product that is consistent, graded okay on all of these tests, you can definitely be certain that it's going to work like this in the next year. And the more time you're allowing, you're looking back, the more you can get a clear picture in terms of consistency. So just to make a conclusion here, you need to choose a product that fits your security needs. Don't look at something that you don't need. Second, never rely on a single test. Similar results for multiple tests provided by different testers, if possible, are actually the one way you can do to validate the quality of a product, but not just one test. And third, look at the consistent results of a product. Look over the last couple of years. This will actually show you if there is a good technology there that it's most likely going to protect you or detect the thing you want in the same manner as it did over the last couple of years. And I think that's it. It should enlighten some of the things regarding to this. Martin?
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely very useful to know. So, and again, as always, I'm coming from the consulting, like start by identifying the business problem and the security needs. One question that I would ask you though, because I know you've been involved with a lot more testing than the MITRE, are there any like particular third-party independent tests that you have like good experience with, that like you find that they have like valuable data to provide? Any recommendations?
Yeah, definitely. And it pretty much depends on, let's say, the type of test you're interested in. But you can definitely look at AV comparatives, AV tests. Those guys are performing a lot of tests. Some of them are designed to evaluate protection. Some of them are designed to evaluate the ETR. Some of them are designed to evaluate the real world behavior. So if you're interested in these kind of things, you should definitely go to their site and look at their tests, look at their methodology, and this should actually help you decide.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is pretty much every single year when the MITRE results are announced, the vendors are pretty much the ones that are interpreting the results. And what we are seeing every single year is some of the misleading marketing practices. Again, the approach is, here is the raw data and you interpret what it means. So we see a lot of different approaches to interpretation. For example, this year, what we are seeing a lot is focusing on the protection aspect, which is like the optional evaluation and not like the core of the MITRE. So can you tell us about, as a technical person, some of the misleading marketing practices that you've seen, and like tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, definitely. And there are a couple of them that are quite fun if you're thinking into this area. So let's see a couple of them. So the first one is, everybody's claiming that he's number one. Everybody. And let's think about it. If you have to choose a score, can't you actually find the one that is the most advantageous to you? Because in theory it's easier. You can think about anything you want. It's your data. You can apply some factors there the way you want. From the mathematical point of view, this is very easy to achieve. So let's see like a very simple example. Let's say that this is the overall score for something. Let's say, I don't know, the analytics coverage, since it's already provided by MITRE. And look at vendor 2, and it's not looking that good. But if vendor 2 is looking for a specific step, let's say one step or a specific sub-step, it's not really relevant. And he is going to create a chart on who's the best on that specific start step, then things might look different. And that's just one way of putting things here. but he may have a claim that, hey, I'm the best for this. And depending on how you're putting this into perspective, then yeah, you're kind of saying that I'm number one. Now, if we are to look on, and Martin, you have actually touch base here a little bit with what's happening this year. Well, MITRE had actually two tests that he performed. So it's one about the detection capabilities, and just like you said, Martin, that's the core test of the MITRE group. But they also created a test for protection capabilities. But what's important here is that the last one is being optional. So you, if you want to participate, you can. Otherwise, you're not forced to. There is also a fee there. So yeah, it's a business decision that different vendors have to take. Now, this is how, let's say, and that, that's just a hypothetical result. It has nothing to do with the results from this year. But let's say that we have, like in this case, 7 vendors. Now, out of this, 3 of them decided not to participate to the protection test. The rest of them, the rest 4 of them participate. Now, is it, let's say, fair or relevant in any way to create an overall score that takes into account detection and protection, especially if 3 of the vendors, that's close to half of them, didn't participate to the protection test at all? And it pretty much depends. If you want to do something, well, it's really easy to consider that the guys that didn't participate have 0% protection rate. Well, obviously that's wrong. If you didn't participate, it doesn't mean that you can't protect anything. It's just an assumption. But if you consider this, then you can actually make an average. And then if you look at the overall, then another vendor, and in this case, it's, let's say, vendor C, that gets pop up to the first position. Now, if we look at the detection, we're going to see that in reality, the best product for detection would have been vendor B, but since the average was done using the 0, then it gets pulled down to the 48% average, and it looks like it didn't detect anything, where the score was very poor. But in reality, what's actually happened there is that somebody decided, hey, not participating is equal to 0. And, that's obviously wrong. And I actually saw something like this, like, building some sort of a map where you have protection on one axis, detection on the other one, and then you plot all of the vendors. And of course, the one that actually have 0 are going to be lined up on the 0 axis. Of course, it's also one way of putting things, and you can, show like, hey, I'm here on top. But again, you're comparing oranges and apples. Those guys didn't participate. You cannot say that if you participated, they didn't. And, based on the same logic, why not add some other guys that didn't participate to MITRE at all and just put them with 0 on detection and 0 on protection? It's just one step over the previous assumption. So that's one thing that we've seen everybody doing. Everybody's number one. Everybody has a way of computing some scores that makes them advantage. The second one is that, well, it's easier to present just part of the truth and not the entire truth. And let's start with this one. Let's say that we have these 7 vendors. We have vendor 5. It's doing well. It's not the best, but it's doing well. It's the third one there. So what vendor 5 can do is create a, let's say, another chart where it's just he and vendor 4, 3, 2, and 1 that have lower score than him. Now it could be under several pretexts, like, hey, I'm going to show you some of my competition, not all of them, but some of my competition, but the result is the same. He's going to look like number 1 while he's not, using just part of the competitors. Also very interesting if you're looking about on what kind of things or how the data can be presented in different aspects. And the third one, you should not, jump to the conclusion that, one size fits all problem. And different companies means different needs. So you cannot say that a good result is good for everyone. And just to give you a quick explanation here, let's look at this visibility score. And let's say that vendor 7 has the best visibility score, and let's say that that it does. Now he can say that, hi, I got the best visibility, I'm the best, I'm the product that you need to buy. But is this score going to help like a small or medium company that has no SOC team whatsoever? It's completely irrelevant for them. So yeah, those are just some misleading marketing practices that we've seen. Again, the best way is to look at other solution, and maybe to look at the data yourself and decides what's best, or what are your business requirements. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because now when I see you talking about it, like I've seen all of these different approaches happening. So it's not like this happened theoretically. This is like what we are really seeing. I have to say two more that I've seen. The first one is creative renaming. So not using the terminology from MITRE, but inventing the phrases that sounds better. So not saying we have this as a raw data in telemetry, but presenting it more like, yeah, this is something more. Another thing that I've seen is focusing, when you cannot detect like all the sub-steps, you start talking about covering the steps, saying we have 100% coverage for the steps. So pay attention to also that, like when the vendor is talking about steps and not about sub-steps, that probably means there are some gaps. It's very
usually
yeah.
that when they're saying, hey, we have 100% detection on the steps, pretty much everybody has. So
yes,
it's not like you're the number one, but you're just using it to put your product in a perspective. You're not different from the other products.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Martin, I just thought about a way to compute a new score. How about if we score the products that have a name that starts with B letter, with
we are number one again.
Yeah, I think that will be a very good score. It will provide a nice ranking system for everybody.
Yeah, sounds perfect. It's so the MITRE, like the marketing around the MITRE messaging, not by MITRE itself, but like by vendors and so on. For me, it's like the tail that is wagging the dog. You start with the results and then you decide how you interpret it, just to make sure like everyone is number one. So it's really interesting every single year to see like all the security vendors just claiming we are number one. So that's why we keep saying for MITRE evaluations, learn how to interpret the data. Because if you are going to rely on the vendors reporting themselves, every single one is going to be number one. And we are very proud of the results that we have. That's why we openly talk about, focus on this. This is how you get the data, understand what it means, and then choose who do you think is like the good vendor for your requirements. So talking about choosing the right solution, so how applicable are the MITRE evaluations to a typical mid-size customer? And I'm talking about a customer that is probably not going to take like the raw data from the telemetry and has like expertise in-house. Again, I'm talking about like typical mid-size customer. What do you think? How applicable are these evaluations?
Well, so first of all, we kind of need to ask ourselves a couple of questions. And I think those are the one that actually says if those tests have value for that customer. Now, the first one is if the customer have a SOC team or an MDR services. I'm saying this from the point of view, if not himself, obviously, if it's a mid-size, it's unlikely to have a SOC team, but if it has a SOC contract with another company that provides this. Now, if this is so, then yes, the attack or the MITRE attack framework might be something that he will be interested in. If it's not, then yeah, he shouldn't look into those data because in particular, let's say the visibility information, it's not something that is going to be interesting for him. The second one is if the customer is more interested in protection capabilities rather than the detection one. And if you're thinking about a mid-sized customer, it's likely that they are going to be more interested in, I just want to buy a product, I just want that product to protect me, I don't want to look at all of the logs and so on. I just want that product to work. Now, if this is so, then while MITRE does have some prevention capabilities, I would suggest to look at other tests that are, better suited for prevention and have, let's say, more history in testing the prevention with more sample set with the more real life scenarios and so on. So if this is so, then you should actually look into this. Otherwise, yeah, you can look at the market. Now, as a general, we should think that each customer should focus on the business problem they are trying to solve. Now, if their business problem is alert fatigue for security operation or security operation challenge, then it should look at some of the information from the raw data from MITRE that they can use, like analytics coverage or high context detection. And by high context detection, I'm actually meaning the number of steps that actually have technique. So pretty much this is how everybody should think about it. I need to start with my business problem. I need to see exactly what my requirement means, and then use the data that actually fits for me or makes any sense for me from the MITRE data. And instead of looking at small things, try to solve the big problems of security instead of just a smaller one. I have a visibility a little bit bigger than your others. And that's it, Martin.
So in conclusion, we can say that Bitdefender is #1, and we can come up with like many different explanations or many different ways how to approach this data to prove that point. But pretty much what we believe at Bitdefender is MITRE evaluations or attack evaluations is an important tool, but it's open to interpretation. So what I would say is our recommendation: understand the basic methodology and terminology, understand, and before that, start by understanding your business problems and security needs that you have. Then learn how to interpret the data from the MITRE evaluations, and then do your own analysis and choose the right solution to fix your problem. Dragos, would you agree that's pretty much the biggest takeaway from our session today?
Yeah, definitely.
So, Dragos, I would like to thank you very much. It's always a pleasure, and I always learn a lot just listening to all your knowledge and expertise and everything that you can share. And I would love to attend like one of your sessions at the college one day, which is not going to happen probably because of the language barrier, but I really appreciate everything that you shared today. I would also like to thank everyone for joining. We are going to share this recording a couple of days later. And hopefully, if you have any questions about MITRE evaluation, you can ask them in the chat, or you can send us a message anytime on the social media, and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we are cut.